Hey everybody, Gary here, and I want to take this time to just give my thoughts on the LTE for Smurfs Village that happened over this past weekend. Now, when this was announced, this LTE, which I guess we're going to call the Foxfire LTE, I don't know if that's the actual name of it, it was a brand new type of LTE that the development team was trying to do. And as you can see here, this is the explanation that they gave to us for an event that lasted 3 days instead of the usual two. Harvest crops and play mini games to gather Foxfire sparks before the festival concludes. Crops with longer yield time grant more Foxfire sparks. Harder levels of mini games grant more sparks. The coveted lantern grants twice as many resources while lit. If it's already in place, it will get reignited with Foxfire for 24 hours. Now, you had to complete tasks and growing crops so you could clear the black circles. And each time you did, you were given 3 rewards. Well, 4 in the final one. Apparently. I didn't get that far. I only made it halfway through. The problem with this is it doesn't really explain everything that works to deducting the points on what you need to do. Now, normally when we would have an LTE, you'd have a list that says, do this, do this, do this, and you get a mini checkpoint along the train with a clear goal in mind. Now, the consensus on this event, the consensus on this is mixed. You know, looking through other communities that play Smurfs Village, participated in this event, to the people who actually got to play this event, you know, some think it was a good event, others would rather go back to the old style. So, say you missed this event. Well, how exactly did this happen? All right, well, to those of you who missed this event, I'm going to explain. It doesn't give you a set list of what to do like on basic LTEs. So you had a lot more freedom to do things. The problem was it doesn't say which crops would give you things. And people had to ask throughout the community what crops you were supposed to plant to give you rewards for sparks and how were the sparks distributed. So when it comes to the crops, any crop that took 1 hour to grow or longer, as far as hours, will get you a Foxfire spark that clears the first part of the black circle. So, perfect example of 1 hour crops are the magic blueberries, the strawberries, and to those of us in the mountain, the goji berries. These are all 1 hour crops. Now, when you plant a 1 hour crop on a farming plot and you harvest it, you see how this first black circle says 1,000? Well, when you harvest that one crop, you get 1 spark. So it'll go down to 999. Now, because we had 3 days to do this, your majority of your time was spent farming crops that had at least 1 hour. And that's where the first problem with this explanation says. It says crops with longer yield grant more Foxfire sparks, but it doesn't say which crops give you the Foxfire sparks. That's why the dev team had to clear this up to people. You know? Now, if it had said crops with a grow time of 1 hour or longer grant you Foxfire sparks, it would have been less vague. It would have been specific. You know, everybody would have known what to grow. Now, the mini game thing, I'm going to talk about in a minute, but there's two issues when it came to growing crops. Well, three actually. The second issue, which I'll talk about first, is the crops themselves. Again, crops had to grow for an hour. Otherwise, you get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir. Gotta love Gene Wilder from Willy Wonka. You know, players who decided, well, we're going to plant some crops before the event starts, and when the event starts and they're finished, we can harvest them. Those did not count. That's the number three. And the number one, of course, I found this out near the end. But before I get to that, I want to just let you know that every garden on all five of the villages, when you harvest crops, accrue to this event. What I found out at the end was in the grove. Now, if you have Smurfs hut placed around garden plots and you use a seed to stage up your crops and then harvest them, say you wanted to plant like the hyacinths, right? Because they're 18 hours. And instead of waiting the 18 hours, you just use a seed to boost them up. Well, guess what? When you harvest those seed enriched hyacinths, well, it counts towards lowering the score down. Sure, it's a once per day thing, so fair balance. I like that. Now, the point of playing the mini games is it didn't say which mini games gave you how much experience points to meet towards your goals. You know, they told you you want to play these on the harder difficulties and you would get more points. So you play on the harder stuff. You know, you don't go through Easy Street all the time because if you play games on Easy Street all the time, you would learn nothing. But that is essentially how it worked. Your job for the 3 days was play all the mini games on the harder difficulties if they had difficulties to begin with, and grow crops to get to the lantern itself in the box at the end. Now, when you start on the event screen, you have a little icon that's got a firefly in there. And when you complete one of the tasks, a portion of this circle on the outside will fill up. And the Smurf head icon will go a quarter of the way after the first one is done. And it will continue to go around. The fact that this gave players the freedom to plant whatever they want was nice. But again, you didn't say that players were supposed to plant crops with at least a 1 hour grow time. And that's kind of a bad takeaway from this. The drawback to this is you have to wait a long time before you can harvest all these things. Now, some people I've read have decided as soon as the event started in all the villages besides the Grove, they literally had their farms grow the crops that took the longest amount of time, the ones that spent a day, like the melons, the honeydew melons on the islands, for example, right? Those take a day. The potatoes, those take a day. The golden potatoes, those take a day. Any of the crops that you have access to, whether it's from the Italian shop or whatever, any of those crops, All right. And you're out on the Swoof planet. The gumballs take 26 hours to grow. So most of the players didn't think about that. I know there were a good handful that said, you know what? Let me just begin this event. It's this time. I'm going to plant potatoes on the mountain. I'm going to plant potatoes in the main village. I'm going to plant honeydew or magic honeydew on the island. I'm going to plant gumballs in the Swoosh village. Now, the hyacinths are 18 hours, and by default, that is the longest growing crop in the grove. And that's how they did it. They just planted the max and wait game. So their first day was, all right, plant the 1 day crops, plant the 1 day crop, plant the 1 day crop, and then just play the mini games. Then when it came time to harvest the crops, harvest all the crops, plant them again. To some players, that worked. Others, not so much. You know, depending on how many mini games you have, also helps you out because, if you have just about all the mini games in your main village, you can play these games to get a nice stack of points. And the same goes for the island and the few games on the mountain. Like, I don't know if everybody has the bunny gallop for the grove. That's what I played in the grove to give me some points to go helping go through this. Minor Smurfs minecart ride on the mountain is what I played there. But most of my time was either playing the games in the main village, those two games listed, Lucky Smurfs games in all three of Lucky Smurfs games, and then mainly on the island, it was the diving game with Handy and Marina. I did the Pirate Smurf game once, and then the Sporty Smurf one for their hard difficulties a few times, and that helped out. Now, I'm going to say it like this. The instructions for this event should have been clearer. All right, that's the big problem. This what you see here as instructions, okay, go ahead. It wasn't clear enough. You know, that's what happened. And to the people who had the lantern and you wanted more time or for it to be lit, whether it was in here or not, or probably the lantern icon on the main set game of the screen, then you had your crop bonus and point bonus to get this. What I think about the prizes for this event, well, I didn't get them all. I only went halfway, and cool. Prizing will always be hit or miss because certain players need certain things. Which version of the LTE do I like better? This one or the old version? While people have mixed reviews for this event, a lot of folks like the old version of the event. Me personally, I honestly don't like either system that the event has, but the train and doing tasks for the train is more palatable. As long as I can get through the dreaded P's a lot faster. That's my thing. If the development team is going to use this system moving forward with how they're going to do the LTEs, one, they need to make things a lot clearer. Two, growing crops for an hour and only getting 1 point per hour on harvested crop is rough, man. That is rough. Like, all the players who don't have a lot of Smurfs in their villages are going to suffer for this. You know, they're going to suffer. I'm thinking about like all the players who haven't even opened up the island yet. And there are players who they just have the village. They haven't gone through all the quests to open up the other villages. They're just the main village. And they probably don't have enough Smurfs. You know, I have 40 Smurfs in my main village. I got 2 garden plots of 20. You know, that's just me at level 60. But some players may not have 40 Smurfs in their village. So if they're going to, before bed, and this was something that I gave as a tip, like to those who weren't maxing out on the day crops straight out the gate, I was like, look, before you go to bed, plant crops that take a very long time to grow. Because again, you're going to be asleep anyway while your Smurfs are farming this stuff. And then when you wake up, whether it's to feed the kids breakfast for Saturday morning cartoons or whatever, right? And then you wake up, load up the game. The announcement says you have tomatoes to harvest because you planted an 8-hour crop, or you have rice on the mountain because that's an 18-hour crop. That's what I planted. I planted rice on the mountain, right? And how you had to do the irises, because the irises are something you can just plant overnight, wake up and just harvest them, or the hyacinths, or the 12-hour Easter lilies, like stuff that you can just grow, don't have to worry about it rotting, and then boom. And that's something else that I forgot to mention. If your crops rot and you use the Smurf berries to restore your crops and then harvest them, that still counts as going through your completion towards goals. Because I unfortunately had that happen with some magic raspberries, man, and some my magic raspberries went bad because I had to go out to dinner or something, right? But yeah, um, on a 10 scale, this one gets a 7.5 out of 10. You know, the freedom was nice, but you got to be more clear. And the fact that crops that are under an hour don't give you a point at all, like I said, that's rough. And if you don't have a lot of Smurfs in your villages to plant, you're not going to be stacking enough points. Even by playing all of your games, you're not going to be stacking enough points to get through stuff. And that's kind of a bum rap. But those are my thoughts. I'm looking to hear what your thoughts were. To all those who participated in the Foxfire LTE, as I'm going to dub it. You can call it what you want, but that's what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call this the Foxfire LTE. Let's hear your thoughts.